Raindrops trickled along the surface of Ganyu's horns as she rushed up the stone stairs leading back to Yuehai Pavilion. She was already soaked, having been rudely awoken by the natural chill by a barrage of raindrops while having her usual afternoon nap. It hadn't been her first encounter with an unexpected rainstorm while out in the wilderness, having become accustomed to the unexpected mood swings that weather can sometimes conjure out of nowhere. She had been born and raised in the peaks of Liyue's many great mountains, so natural occurrences such as storms didn't even faze her. While her attire was soaked, this wouldn't be her first time returning to her workplace looking as if she had went for a swim with her clothing still on. This was actually pretty common, and her fellow employees eventually learned to just accept it. However, her main boss, Ningguang, didn't take too kindly to Ganyu returning to her workstation without even drying off. So she had ordered Ganyu to at least dry herself off before even taking a step past the mat all employees met upon stepping into the building. Therefore, a new protocol was initiated to Ganyu's co-workers to provide her a towel, shall she ever return soaked to death. She was met with that very thing upon stepping through the entrance, a plain white towel being handed to her instantly. Apparently her absence had been enough to assure the other workers to be ready upon her return. "I sincerely apologize for the trouble." She apologized, starting to dab herself as dry as she could muster.
"It's no trouble, Miss Ganyu."
Her co-worker, Teyvat, replied with no sign of annoyance or negativity.
"Please, don't worry about it. After all, the storm literally showed up without any warning, so you aren't the only person who has returned soaking wet."
Teyvat was your casual Liyue citizen, having short black hair, a skinny build, and dressed with the usual clothing of lower-rank employees of Yuehai Pavilion. He had only been employed just recently, but his positive attitude and respect for the higher-ups like Ganyu and the Ganyu and Keqing was enough to make him seem like a longer-term employee. "I see, but I've just done this so much that it feels like a bad habit anymore," she confessed. "I just hate being a burden to all of you."
"Nonsense,"
Teyvat clarified.
"You've served Liyue Harbor for centuries upon centuries, Miss Ganyu. You're far from any burden to any of us. So please, don't think for a second we see you as such. Just take it easy and don't worry about it."
Ganyu could see he was being legitimate, so she just nodded her head and continued to pat herself down with her provided towel. She still felt guilty, but she knew well that she couldn't win this conversation, so she just decided to cut it there to save time. Teyvat returned to his duties elsewhere as Ganyu finished up her drying, far from even close to being ridden of all the rain her clothing had absorbed like a sponge. Regardless, she placed the mildly wet piece of cloth somewhere other employees would see and dispose of it elsewhere, and made her way back to her office. Upon entering her office, the scent of the sweet flowers she had picked and potted on her desk as decoration met her nostrils. It was an essence she delighted, the scent being sweet with just a hint of the aroma of nature she loved. It reminded her of her days before the Archon War, making her contract with Rex Lapis, and her job as the secretary of Teyvat's most wealthy leader. Days she wished she could live again, but knew they had long since passed. Those were times when things were so much simpler, up until things suddenly changed with all the gods going at it for reasons unknown. Abandoning her reminiscing of her days as a young adeptus roaming the peaks of Liyue and admiring the world's beauty, she walked to her desk and took a seat. The trapped rain in the fabric of her clothing gushed against her rear as she eyed her desk, multiple older documents neatly organized on one side, while on the other were new and untouched documents of all kinds waiting to join the other side of her workstation. She started with the first one she saw, moving it to the center of her desktop and reading it over. It was the usual kind of workload she saw constantly every single day. Ledgers, Liyue business taxing documentation, letters from other regions' merchants and leaders wanting to make business deals with Ningguang, and documentation on shipments delivered to the harbor area by merchants or captains. The majority got tossed away, seeing most deals proposed to Ningguang were non-negotiable, but she still read them over and organized them in a way that the person who would deliver them to Ningguang could understand. It was the taxes and shipment documents that were the real annoyances, but Ganyu had picked up on how to do them efficiently in her years of working there, so she didn't really have any trouble with them anymore. The only time she did have actual trouble was when someone attempted to evade their taxes or if someone had incorrectly documented a shipment. Luckily, her current workload had seemed to not have any irregularities, so she worked rather quickly. She was relieved at the work being not as taxing on her mental strength, already weighed down from that morning's stack of dried ink and paper alone. While her escape to nature had been ruined by the storm, her slumber had been long enough to give her some strength back. Something that was evident enough upon the last dab of ink to her quill's end and a celebratory long sigh of relief. She had finished her current stack of work, at least until another stack took its place within a short time. If she could have, she would have preferred to take a long nap, but she knew all too well that that luxury wouldn't come until later that night in the comfort of her own bed. Therefore, she just sat there and waited for someone to come along to fetch the finished work, expecting another workload to follow in their stead. It took a while, but eventually the usual lady who delivered all of Ganyu's forwarded work to the boss high up in the sky walked into her office and began to collect the tower of finished scripture. Her name was Shinhai, and she was a veteran of Yuehai Pavilion. Ganyu had known her since her first day of initiation into the building over 2 decades ago, and upon their first meet, instantly became great friends. Ganyu had assisted her in much complicated matters that even she had struggled with while working her way up to the current position in Ningguang's ranks. Their friendship had eventually turned into a senpai to mentor type of relationship, Shinhai having become a student to her colleague and friend after climbing higher in her occupation. It had taken a while, but eventually the student had met her mentor's teachings fully, and ever since hasn't struggled in her ascension up Ningguang's ladder. "Afternoon, Miss Ganyu," she had greeted kindly while collecting Ganyu's workload. Ganyu smiled at the sight and greeting of her once student. "Afternoon, Shinhai," Ganyu returned, enjoying the change of pace. "I see that the storm managed to get you," Shinhai mused. "Must be uncomfortable in those wet clothes." Ganyu shook her head, holding her smile. "Well, it certainly isn't my preference. It isn't my first encounter with a rogue storm. I was raised in nature itself, so any effect by the rain to my body is basically second nature to me." "Oh, that's right," Shinhai replied. "I forgot you had originally come from the mountains of Liyue. Silly me." Ganyu giggled under her breath, assuring her fellow employee and friend that she hadn't taken offense. "Don't worry, Shinhai. It's fine. I wouldn't get upset over something so easy to mistake." "Thank you, Miss Ganyu." Shinhai accepted. "Oh, I almost forgot. I was told to inform you that Miss Ningguang requires your attention in the Jade Chamber." Ganyu's curiosity piqued at that, her mind searching for any specific reason that Ningguang wanted to see her. However, nothing came to mind, nor did she remember any recent message or conversation with her boss as of late that could have led to an unexpected meeting with her. "Were there any details on why she required my attention?" Ganyu asked. "I'm afraid not," Shinhai confirmed. "I was just delivered a letter from the Tianquan herself that stated such. If I had to guess, it must be a private matter that is confidential to only the higher-ups of Liyue Harbor." Ganyu nodded her head in agreement, seeing that that was the most logical reason why she wasn't even informed or given any hint that Ningguang would be discussing some sort of matter with her in any way whatsoever. "Considering it came from Lady Ningguang herself, I best not waste any time," Ganyu stated, getting up from her desk chair. "Thank you for the information, Shinhai." "Just doing my job, Miss Ganyu," Shinhai returned. "Best of wishes with whatever Lady Ningguang has planned for you." Ganyu simply smiled, then she took off in a rush. Before she met the exit, she was stopped by Tinyan yet again, an umbrella held out in front of her as a practical barricade.
"Best have this before you go out into that monsoon,"
he advised. Ganyu let out an awkward giggle, realizing that she had just nearly repeated her bad habit yet again. Right, she said, taking the folded up umbrella and unfolding it. Thanks, Tinyan.
Don't mention it,
He replied.
Someone has to watch for you.
Ganyu just smiled, then she turned to the exit and stepped back out into the barrage of raindrops. She was guarded by the roofing that extended past the entrance to Yuehai Pavilion and down both sides of the building's upper walkway. But where she was going, she'd need protection from the raging storm and winds. She turned right towards the one person who Ningguang trusted to deliver whoever had the proper clearance, Bullion. However, upon eyeing Bullion, a certain other umbrella-shielded attendee caught her attention, immediately recognizing them upon the sight of their hairstyle. The 2 points in their hair that gave them the appearance of having cat ears was something Ganyu was too familiar with, having worked with said person for many, many years. The Yuhong herself. Keqing made eye contact upon the door closing behind her co-worker, her eyes speaking that it wasn't a coincidence that they had met up unexpectedly. Oh, good. You're here, Keqing said with assurance. Looks like whatever the boss upstairs has in store is of great importance. Ganyu met her colleague at Bullion's station, trying to keep a good amount of distance between them. She didn't hate or dislike Keqing, just found her behavior towards their god very disrespectful, so she just preferred to keep her distance unless the time called for them to work together. This was one of those cases, so she tried to keep conversation as Bullion prepped their travel up to the Jade Chamber. I'm guessing this was just as much a surprise to you as it was to me? Ganyu started. Indeed, Keqing replied. Seems odd for Lady Ningguang to call us up so hastily without any sort of hint or preparation beforehand. What do you suppose it is? Ganyu continued. Not sure. For it to be so sudden, it could be a situation that came out of nowhere that endangers the citizens of Liyue Harbor. I haven't experienced anything unnatural as of late, so whatever it may be, it went under my radar. And that's not good. Ganyu nodded, the platform beginning to ascend into the sky up to the Jade Chamber high above Liyue Harbor. The winds were strong, but this hadn't been their first ascension in bad weather. They'd become adapted to the harsh conditions that Teyvat's unpredictable weather patterns could throw their way, so as long as they remained vigilant against the rain and winds, they could outlast the short trip. They were at the Jade Chamber in less than a minute, stepping off the platform carefully and rushing to the entrance. Even with the umbrellas, both of them had been mildly soaked by the rain that the winds had captured in their hasty and violent travels. However, the rain didn't even faze them. They were more focused on Ningguang's reasoning for their attention. Upon stepping into the building, Keqing and Ganyu did their best to clean themselves of the mild, misty shower they'd endured in their travel to Ningguang's abode. They didn't want to anger any of the assistants in charge of tidying up the entirety of the structure, so they gave it their best effort. After somewhat cleaning themselves off, they made their way to Ningguang's office, finding their wealthy boss admiring her wall of multiple secret operations. Upon her two most valued colleagues making their presence, she turned to them with a smile. You made it. Very good. Now we can get to work. Ningguang greeted. Forgive me, Lady Ningguang, but can you please explain why you called us here? Keqing inquired. We never received any sort of note or message to prepare, nor had any sort of awareness that you need to speak with us on any trivial matters. I apologize for the lack of awareness, but I didn't have the time to make any preparations. She explained. You see, I had only received word this morning from one of my main inquirers, Yelan, that there had been some unusual activity occurring within the perimeters of Liyue Harbor. She did some investigating over the past week and found that one of our main military guards that guards one of the main paths into Liyue Harbor had gone missing. She searched any potential routes where any treasure hoarders or other enemies commonly reside, had even ambushed them to see if they had possession of our missing guard. Even though she interrogated and managed to spill information from the camp's leaders, nothing of our guard's whereabouts was mentioned. Therefore, Yelan had no choice but to seek other tactics of where he had been taken, seeing her trail had gone cold. She resorted to records made by any other guards that could be connected to the kidnapping, and once she made one, she immediately came to me for further action. She attempted to keep the matter to a point where it wouldn't require my attention, but upon discovering something that had a connection to the date of the guard's disappearance, she feared that the situation may be more severe than just a kidnapped guard. On that same day, an unusual-looking person had exited Liyue Harbor, and from guard and witness reports, it was confirmed he came from Northland Bank and had spoken to the Fatui prior to his departure. Due to our past dealings with the Fatui, it is in my best interest to investigate all sorts of dealings between Fatui members, and considering their exit route was where our missing guard was posted, it seems very possible that our suspect may have had malicious plans in mind. Both Ganyu and Keqing could see the reasoning for Ningguang's suspicions, but something seemed a little too hasty for Ganyu's taste, not being in total agreement. Lady Ningguang, if I may, I think that this is too much of an assumption with little evidence to actually prove the suspect did actually ambush our guard. She objected, finding that Keqing was actually following her thoughts on the matter as well. How do we actually know our suspect is part of the Fatui? He could have been a merchant looking to make a business deal with Northland Bank for all we know. Do we even have a record of this person of interest having any history with Fatui connections? Ningguang nodded in understanding. Very insightful as usual, and I'm glad you noticed those key things as well, Ganyu. Ningguang said, I did indeed take those things into account, and Yelan did confirm with me that this suspect has ties to the Fatui. His name is Rishav Starchovsky, and he's originally from Snezhnaya. He is a part of the higher branches of Snezhnaya's government, and is considered a very well-trained official. He's more than capable of taking out a Milov guard on his own. Alright, we have enough confirmation that he is definitely Fatui. However, why would he want to take out or potentially kill a Milov guard? Keqing added, You are the Yuhong, which means it's your job to make sure that Liyue Harbor remains free of any endangerment. Ningguang answered, Tell me, Keqing, how do you think this whole matter escaped your surveillance? Keqing thought for a moment about the question, seeing that she had even mentioned that as a possibility to Ganyu. Then it clicked. Because it wasn't documented by the guard that is currently missing. She solved, fear staining her tone. That means... Ningguang nodded again. Yelan's spies investigated the entirety of Liyue Harbor and found that some strange activity had been happening en route from Northland Bank to an abandoned mine just outside of the perimeter of Liyue Harbor. That means that some Fatui members got past the path that our missing guard was posted at, meaning dangerous Fatui members could have gotten inside our city's borders undetected. The situation is unclear right now, but the fact they're potentially inside our city and need to be inside our city to proceed with whatever plan they have at all means that it is to occur inside our borders. This potentially poses a major hazard to our citizens, but unless we figure it out, we can't be sure. The only solution would be to evacuate Liyue Harbor and expose them one by one. However, if there is a potential danger among us, any action could cause the trigger to be pulled. So rather than risking lives with a hasty retreat, my plan is to go straight to the source. We know they go back to that abandoned mine at night due to Yelan's persistence, so we go to them with a warrant and stop the potential plan before it even has a chance to go off, if there is one at all. Again, the hastiness drew an unease from Ganyu. There was a lot of things that were risky with this plan, seeing the Fatui had straight connections to Northland Bank, and if they managed to miss even one person, Liyue Harbor could end up bursting into flames. Lady Ningguang, I feel we're acting too fast, seeing the Fatui has lots of connections to Liyue Harbor. Ganyu objected again. We can't miss even one person. Otherwise, they can make it back to set off whatever they may have ready. We'd have to be sure every possible route is blocked before we even try going to them in a very unusual area. They may figure out that we are onto them, and that could potentially be the alert to pull the trigger. I agree. Keqing added. We barely escaped the wrath of 2 sea gods with our bodies intact and no casualties. If we go to them without trapping them in first, we are at risk of someone potentially setting off the fireworks. Ningguang nodded yet again. I hear your concern and understand, Ningguang said. Yelan has already made the proper arrangements in secrecy to Beidou, and has assured me that the shipment will not reach the Fatui sites. It will be here in 2 days' time and will be cloaked as a delivery to Qingse village for renovations to a home. In the meantime, to assure no word gets to the Fatui, Yelan has sent some of her best, as much as herself, to eliminate any spies or imposters along the route we plan to send the supplies on. That's where you two come in. I need you to clear a specific route that has a large number of Fatui camps. It's the last route needed for one shipment to get to Liyue Harbor unseen, so it's critical that we clear out any Fatui. You two are my best, so I trust that you can handle this without any sort of problem. Ganyu and Keqing nodded in agreement to Ningguang's request, having been tasked with much worse in their time. That's what I like to see. Ningguang chimed. I'll have someone deliver a map with the route lined out as soon as I have the full details on everything. I imagine this won't be until tomorrow, seeing I only received word from Yelan early today. Therefore, I want you to get as much rest as possible for the road ahead tomorrow. The Fatui are clearly unpredictable, so there's no telling what we may be up against. Good luck, you two. With a bow from both of them, Keqing and Ganyu took their leave, a ping of fear in their hearts at the potentially impending doom in their midst. The Fatui had been mad enough to awaken a sea god, so there was no telling what their potential plan could be. All that they hoped was that they could manage to stop it before it even had a chance to be executed. At the moment of their departure, a single jagged bolt of lightning cracked from the sky like a whip, piercing their ears as they made their way back to Boyun and returned to Liyue Harbor far below. It felt as if the gods were sending a message or warning to them, and despite their past challenges with unspeakable threats, something felt different. Something Ganyu thought about deeply during the entire descent to Yuehai Pavilion. Shivers engulfed Ganyu's body upon stepping into her usual spring that she loved to bathe in after a stressful day at work. While it was cold at first, her body quickly adapted to the temperature, becoming less frigid and more comfortable with the water's embrace to her bare body. This was something she commonly did after a hard day or before something stressful, and in that case, it was both. The day ahead being one of absolute focus, and today having been stressful enough. Missions like the one ahead were what called for an occasion as such, seeing it loosened any tightened muscles and put her mind at a somewhat ease. She hadn't gotten this opportunity when Liyue Harbor had been put in danger by an ancient sea god that she had seen put to rest by Rex Lapis the first time centuries ago, and it was only due to the combined efforts of the Adepti and Liyue's strongest that they prevailed in triumph. It had been a sudden unexpected battle that nobody could have prepared for, and only until after the fact had she gotten a chance to relax after a hard-won battle. She pondered on what the Fatui might be up to, but at the same time, she didn't want to know. While she was shy and contemned, Ganyu had a small part of her that anticipated the heat of battle. She didn't like violence, but if it involved protecting the people of Liyue Harbor, she had no choice but to follow the contract she had swore to follow. Either way, she would fight for the people, contract or no contract. While she was an Adeptus, she was also human, so she had a duty to protect humans as well. She'd seen much tragedy, loss, and experienced such as a child, so she refused to let anyone feel the same pain she had felt and seen far too many times. It was something nobody should have to experience, but so was the cruelty of life. She dipped her head under the cool water and just stayed there for a second to take in the quiet. It was a peaceful calm that she enjoyed every time she decided to take a dip in the spring out of desperation for a short rest. No sound, worries, corruption, peril, good colliding with evil eternally. Just peace and tranquility. However, just like with reality's natural order, her peace eventually had to come to end. Out of breath, she returned back to reality, crickets being the only accompaniment upon her ascension back above the water's smooth and cold surface. Moving her icy blue locks from her eyes, she sat back against the banking and just admired the sunset out in the distance. She allowed her mind to drift away, remembering back when she would admire the resting of the sun with her adoptive mother Cloud Retainer. She had found Ganyu's amazement with sunsets silly, but at the same time, she knew Ganyu was a curious child discovering new things in her own innocent way, so she had entertained her adopted child's interest out of motherly respect. Ganyu giggled at the memories, remembering them very well. Those were the ones she cherished the most, even if Cloud Retainer wasn't her real mother. She had been enough of her mother to raise her into who she was, so in Ganyu's mind, her adoptive mother had succeeded in her role that she never had to take. The sun had nearly fallen behind the clouds, so she took that as her cue to start getting ready to leave. Standing up in the water, she stepped out onto the grassy banking. She had abandoned her rain-soaked clothing and had brought a second pair of clean clothes, these clothes being less work-oriented and more average clothes. Once her underwear and bra were dressed, she moved to slipping on her other attire, then put on her shoes. Upon her redressing, she started to walk back to Liyue Harbor, but before leaving, took one last look at her little paradise. Old memories swarmed her mind upon looking back, causing her to smile in melancholic joy. If only I could go back to those days. She pondered, letting out a sigh. If only. The memories faded, and upon the moon beginning its ascent into the night sky, Ganyu started her trip back to her home in the bustling city of Liyue Harbor. A set of knocks met Ganyu's ears, waking from her peaceful slumber. She was unsure if she actually heard knocking, or if it had just been a fragment of her dream, but upon another set meeting her senses, she knew she hadn't been dreaming. In fact, she winced in caution at the sound of the knocks. They weren't like casual knocks, but more frantic, as if the person were trying to warn her or get her attention in a desperate act. Half asleep, Ganyu made her way to her front door and opened it to the sight of one of Ningguang's main Jade Chamber secretaries. However, aside from the oddity of someone knocking on her door at a very late hour, her condition was horrible. She was caked with ash and had wounds that were leaking faint amounts of blood. It wasn't until Ganyu looked past her unexpected guest that she saw the reason why she had been abruptly awoken late in the night. Fire. There was unholy amounts of fire blazing the streets and many buildings of Liyue Harbor, the smell of a simmering campfire grazing the airways of the night. Ganyu was instantly terrified, unsure of what was currently happening nor what caused it. What in the gods is happening? Ganyu questioned with fear. Ningguang's secretary, Baiwen, through rough and violent coughs, did her best to explain between desperate breaths. Ambush! Fatui! Ganyu froze, remembering the discussion between Ningguang, herself, and Keqing earlier. There had been a plan. The Fatui had caught on, and they were too late. We need to evacuate Liyue Harbor, Ganyu ordered. Where's Ningguang and the Yuheng? I don't... Baiwen was too weak to think or answer clearly, so she took action, running back into her abode to grab her bow. Upon her return, Ganyu grabbed Baiwen, gently lay her over her shoulder, then started down into the streets of the city. On her trek, she had wondered why her god Morax or the Adepti hadn't interfered. It was clear the situation was dire, and controlling the situation had gone out the window. The Fatui had caught them with the element of surprise, so they were drastically unprepared for this attack. That didn't matter right now. Ganyu's first initiative was to get Baiwen to safety, so she moved towards the outside of Liyue Harbor where she wouldn't be affected by the smoke and overwhelming heat of the many fires engulfing the entirety of the city. Her breathing was hoarse and rough, so fresh air was a must to assure Baiwen a start to her recovery amidst the absolute chaos. She found a nice spot where she could hide Baiwen from any sort of enemy, up until she could hopefully resolve the ensuing hell upon the harbor, then took off back towards the city. Upon crossing the bridge where she usually would stop to pet the stray dogs and cats, she was immediately met with a massive warmth that radiated from the inferno just 10 yards from in front of her. It felt like the equivalent of being just outside the range of a dragon spewing fire in offense. She brushed aside all of her fears and armed herself with her bow, ready to take on any enemy who stood in her path. Armed and ready, she started into the city at a fast pace, immediately feeling the blazing essence of fire overwhelm her in her trek. Upon her pacing into the streets, she noticed something that made her stomach turn in horror. It was quiet. No sound except the roaring of the flames surrounding her was audible, and that was a sign that she may have arrived too late to save any citizens who had been victimized by this unexpected assault by the Fatui. Regardless, she didn't want to risk anything, so she started into the first building, a restaurant that served only the wealthiest of Liyue and beyond. The doors to the entrance were already unhinged from their supports, having been broken off by some sort of powerful source, to which Ganyu had guessed some sort of bomb. Her guess had instantly been confirmed upon her eyeing the inner side of the door, a black substance stained along the midsection of its body. Ganyu felt her stomach turn at the grim discovery, knowing that due to the residue of gunpowder being on the opposite side, meant that whoever had solved the explosion was inside when it occurred. From the amount of gunpowder evident on the door, Ganyu knew that this explosion had very well been powerful enough to kill or badly injure a large number of people. Therefore, her chances of finding any survivors was low, but regardless, she still called out for any. Is there anybody in here? She called out loud enough for anybody to hear over the roar of the flames. She listened for any responses, but after none came after a minute's time, she knew that casualties had indeed been caused by whatever the Fatui had used to turn Liyue Harbor into a fiery inferno. While she felt emotion peeing her ancient heart, she knew she had to keep searching for more survivors in the massive utopia before the fires could spread any further than they already had. Reluctantly, she turned back to the streets of Liyue Harbor and continued her pursuit. She searched each building, finding nothing but the same exact sights that she had met in the first. Charred corpses, blazing heat, and smoke had littered the building's floors, having been killed in an instant by whatever the Fatui had planted out of the sights of the Keqing and other Liyue officials. Ganyu hadn't seen something so tragic and horrifying like this since the Archon War. That historic event had led to many deaths, and the battlefields that the gods had clashed upon had been littered by the bodies of those who got caught in the line of fire. She remembered walking the fields every day and seeing nothing but the fallen corpses of humans everywhere she looked. If it hadn't been for Morax's guidance throughout all of those years of tyranny, violence, and death, Ganyu most likely would have taken her own life to escape. She was having flashbacks to those days with each attempt to save at least one lone survivor, and with each failed effort, her emotions grew more and more. Was she already too late to save any lives?
Ganyu!
Then she heard a voice she recognized.
Ganyu! Is that you?
From among the flames, she saw a silhouette of someone, and upon seeing the 2 points atop her head, she knew she hadn't just been imagining a voice.
Keqing!
Ganyu responded back, carefully moving around the growing fires to Keqing's position. Upon reaching her colleague, she was horrified. She gasped at the state of her coworker. A giant gash in her right shoulder, multiple small lacerations dressing her entire body, and her clothes and flesh covered in dirt and ash.
What happened to you?
Ganyu questioned. Keqing struggled to speak, having lost a lot of blood from her current injuries.
Enemies! They attacked! Without warning!
Ganyu didn't push for more. It was clear that Keqing had taken a hard hit at some point and had barely managed to escape the full impact of the strike. Nonetheless, she was still in no condition to fight or be treading in a battlefield of several hazards.
It's okay. Don't talk.
Ganyu ordered.
You're injured very badly and need to not put any further stress on your shoulder. Otherwise, you'll lose more blood. I'll be fine. The harbor. It's under attack. You need to stop them.
Ganyu shook her head.
Stop being stubborn. You need help before you bleed out. I'll stop them, but you need to get out of danger.
As a clear statement that she meant what she said, Ganyu moved Keqing up and over her right shoulder as gently as possible. She didn't listen to any of Keqing's objection if there were any, and moved towards the harbor area. She moved down the stone steps to where the recent imported loads from the harbor were stored for pickup, and looked out past the archway where she could see the wharf wide and clear. Upon seeing the giant jade screen manifested and 3 somewhat burly figures on the opposite side in the distance, Ganyu knew she had to hurry. Her boss and Liyue's leader was in danger. She looked around for a spot to set Keqing down out of harm's way, and quickly found a nice spot where she was shielded and safe from any crossfire. Keqing grunted upon the action, but Ganyu knew it wasn't any worry, so she just worked her colleague to safety carefully. After Keqing was secure, Ganyu armed herself and worked to the archway. She knew she had to be stealthy, so she made sure not to go far beyond the archway and looked out towards the wharf again. Ningguang still had her jade screen up, and the other figures had not even budged. So that had been enough confirmation that they hadn't seen her. She estimated the distance of her shot, knowing she had only one opportunity to kill all of them to avoid any additional tricks. From experience with her archery skills, she knew she was at least 60 yards out, which was too risky to guarantee a hit to all 3 of them. With her current position confirmed to be too far away, she eyed past the archway for any route to a position where she could still be hidden from harm, but close enough to get a clear shot. Not far out past her current position, she saw a tarped stack of recently imported luggage from the harbor. It was tall enough for her to stand and within about 40 yards of distance from her targets, so she decided to take it. As stealthily as possible, she moved past the storage area, jumped off the side of the steps past the archway to avoid sticking out like a sore thumb, and crouched in the provided shadows of the night. To be sure no attention had been stirred, she looked out to her targeted area of fire. Her trio of enemies had not looked away from Ningguang. She let out a long breath of relief, then returned to focusing heavily on her targeted area to take her shot. Remaining crouched, she held her breath and quickly snuck over to the target area of fire. She had made sure not to drag her feet along the route, and upon reaching the area, she let out another long breath to calm her nerves. She could hear what was being said by both sides upon preparing the shot, knowing she had to make this shot count.
Did you really think we wouldn't retaliate after you made one of our harbingers look like a fool?
Spoke one of the three. His voice was slick and sinister like a serpent, and was definitely not one Ganyu recognized. His voice gave her goosebumps as she moved into position, listening further to the conversation.
I knew you'd retaliate, but not in such a way as this.
Ningguang replied.
Why take your revenge out on all of Liyue Harbor's citizens? The Keqing were the ones who humiliated your harbinger, not the citizens.
The answer is simple. Had our plan originally gone through without your interference, your precious city would have been lost to the ocean for eternity.
The same voice explained.
We are simply accomplishing the very goal we had strived for from the beginning, eliminating Liyue Harbor from the map of Teyvat.
Ganyu couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Fatui had planned mass genocide as a form of justice? Had this been an order from the Tsaritsa herself?
You realize that by sinking my city, you lose a lot for your own country?
Ningguang claimed.
Your Majesty has business ties with Liyue Harbor through the Northland Bank, and by destroying that, Snezhnaya loses a lot of resources.
Whomever was the head of the operation responded by laughing, which wasn't a good sign.
As far as I'm concerned with our ties to Liyue Harbor, I don't care.
He mocked.
We were given a direct order to remove Liyue Harbor from existence by Her Majesty herself, so clearly she has no problem in cutting contact with your city.
Then what could I offer you to prevent the destruction of my city?
Ningguang offered.
Name your price. I am sure I can meet your standards.
Another set of laughs permeated the night breeze.
It truly is a sight when the almighty Tianquan is forced to bid for the mercy of her empire. Unfortunately, this isn't an act out of business, Tianquan. This is an act of vengeance for one of our own. So no amount of Mora will save you.
Then I can see that there's no point in continuing this conversation.
Ganyu could see it was her time to act, so she pulled back her arrow, using her vision to infuse her shot with elemental energy, took aim, and fired. The arrow hit the enemy in the middle, and her snowflake arrows struck the other two like ricocheting bullets. The Fatui who had been the one negotiating with Ningguang was the only one who didn't fall immediately, but it was clear that he had been injured by the shot. Taking advantage of the momentary stun, Ningguang followed up by attacking with her geo-energy while Ganyu prepared another shot for the killing blow. Ningguang's attacks hit with a good amount of force, knocking back the cloaked enemy with each impact. Ganyu infused her cryo-energy into her second shot and fired again, hitting her target easily, along with the two additional snowflake arrows. However, the enemy remained on his feet, somehow maintaining his balance after the many hits. Ganyu was shocked. Her arrows are usually able to kill enemies easily, but upon hearing him chuckle, any sense of victory shattered. From his wrists down, the veins of his body radiated an icy blue glow, as if he'd absorbed all of the elemental energy from Ganyu's snowflake arrows.
Nice trick, Adeptus,
he mocked.
My turn.
At a raging speed, he lunged forward at Ningguang's shield, shattering it like glass upon impact. Then, before Ningguang could even defend herself, she was met with the strike from the cloaked Fatui agent, his entire left arm puncturing through her abdomen like a newly forged sword's blade. Ningguang was immediately stunned and stuttering in shock from the blow she had taken, and upon the mysterious enemy pulling his arm back, Ningguang's body started to become blanketed in a layer of ice. It took mere seconds for Ningguang's entire body to become frozen, and upon the completion of the freezing process, the Fatui agent landed a singular violent blow to his victim, shattering her to pieces like glass. Ganyu was horrified at what she had just witnessed, knowing it was her elemental energy that caused Ningguang's demise. She wanted to cry, but knew it was pointless. She was his next target, and that meant she needed to focus on getting away. However, upon his response, she didn't even have to run.
Be grateful that I used all of that energy on her,
he taunted calmly.
I should actually thank you, seeing you gave me what I needed to finally shut her up. In return, I'll give you the luxury of mercy and a head start in escaping this place before it goes into the ocean for good. I'd suggest you start running now, because you only have 30 seconds.
Ganyu didn't hesitate and took the offer, knowing there was nothing she could do to stop him. She'd just witnessed his abilities firsthand, and she couldn't match his speed or powers. She ran from the wharf to the storage area to fetch Keqing, working quickly to maneuver her over her shoulder.
What are you? There's no time!
Ganyu ordered, running back up the stone steps, down the streets of the city, and towards the bridge. She didn't think at all and just crossed the place where she'd come to pet and feed strays, contemplating on whether or not she'd done the right thing. She was clearly outpowered by whomever had murdered her boss to nothing but ice shards, so had she stayed, she most likely would have died. But was that better than running like a coward? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden massive boom to her ears, resembling the sound of a giant's footsteps. The ground rumbled beneath her feet as she stopped and looked back, seeing only massive clouds of smoke and rubble erupt from the mountainsides that the city clung to like a leaf to a branch. The explosions came in intervals as she watched the city she had lived in for centuries begin to collapse into the ocean like a sinking ship. All of the supports the city had shattered, and now Liyue Harbor was nothing more than a landmark of ruins. A city built and expanded over the course of history that had been destroyed in mere seconds. Ganyu couldn't believe the sight before her eyes, but she knew she couldn't dwell on it, knowing her colleagues were in need of medical help and assistance. Her co-worker had been quiet during the entire destruction of their home, speechless on what had just happened. It seemed impossible, but what was done was done.
Now, what do we do?
Keqing asked, her voice full of sorrow.
We find Baiwen, then head for Wang Shuwen. We must inform someone of what's happened. Someone important. Who?
Keqing questioned.
Rex Lapis.
The following hours of the destruction of Liyue Harbor had been ones of sorrow and great emotions. Ganyu still couldn't believe what she had seen at the harbor. It was as if the mystery Fatui assailant had struck her once boss with a force equivalent to a raging meteorite colliding with the surface of Teyvat's soil. It had seemed otherworldly, or even something that only an Adeptus was capable of. She'd seen the 7 gods of her world clash with very violent and bloody methods to attempt dropping one another to their knees in defeat. But this method of murder that had ended the life of her nation's wealthiest individual was unlike anything in comparison. It happened in the blink of an eye, and only until after he had taken extensive amounts of damage that should have killed him. It was as if he was waiting for the perfect opportunity and received it upon her attempting to help Ningguang. A shiver coursed down her spine at her recollection of the memory of what potentially could have caused the Tianquan's fate and Liyue Harbor's sudden termination, causing the teacup currently cupped in her hands to slightly spill. She'd been offered it after explaining the truth that would never fail to traumatize her for as long as she continued to live. After leaving the borders of her once home, she had gone back to find Baiwen and had found her exactly where she had left her prior to the infiltration of the city. Out of her 2 survivors that were in desperate need of medical attention, Keqing had been the worst for wear. Even though she is a half Adeptus, Ganyu only had the strength of a human and couldn't manage to carry 2 adult women. Luckily for her, Baiwen hadn't been injured to the point of being unable to walk and had only received minimal damage from one of the blasts. The overwhelming amount of smoke and ash that had purged her airway was the reason she had been short of breath, so after breathing in some fresh air for a while, she'd gotten back enough strength to tread onward. Keqing hadn't been as lucky, and Ganyu had resorted to using minimal amounts of her cryo energy to stop the massive gash in Keqing's right shoulder from bleeding. It had worked well enough, and not long after, she had passed out in Ganyu's arms due to exhaustion. Upon arriving at Wangshu Inn, seeing the staff knew the Keqing well, they knew that when they came in looking as if they'd escaped a war by the skin of their backs, it wasn't a good sign. The first sign was Ningguang's absence, seeing whenever Ganyu or Keqing came unannounced, they usually were accompanied by their leader. It was just a way of keeping everyone up to speed with whatever business was afoot, and the staff of Wangshu Inn knew that very well. So for the 2 aces of the Keqing to show up unexpectedly without their alpha, it raised red flags instantly. The second sign was Ganyu's current choice of clothing. A main executive of the Tianquan never dresses this way, and seeing Ganyu was a constantly booked employee of Ningguang's empire, she usually never had the chance to visit Wangshu Inn outside of work-related matters. Therefore, her current attire of a plain t-shirt and short pajama-like pants didn't really sell her reasoning of arrival as business-oriented. The other clear signs were an unconscious Keqing with potentially fatal injuries, ripped and burned clothing, and the fact that she was being carried. A Yuheng isn't your type to just show up unannounced in another associate's arms. Baiwen never left the Jade Chamber either, so her presence was also a major red flag to the staff of the inn. Therefore, after seeing many things didn't add up right, Vergoldet assessed the situation and took action by helping furthermore. To start, Keqing was given a spare room to rest in until morning, seeing their main target Rex Lapis was not there, so they would have to go to the next best place. Ganyu knew of Mondstadt's cathedral through her occupation, and knew that it was a perfect solution to Keqing and Baiwen's injuries. The main healer, Barbara Pegg, was well known to have healed anything from the animals to knights of the Mondstadt Brigade, so she assumed there'd be no trouble in getting assistance from the young Soul Weaver. After all, the Keqing had worked with and had a great alliance with her sister Jean, who is also the current acting Grand Master of the region. Right now, they needed any amount of help they could get, and the first step was getting back on their feet. After that, they'd need to consult the situation with said acting Grandmaster, then figure out how they would resolve it. Easier said than done. A tap to Ganyu's shoulder made her jump and spill a little more of her herbal drink on the wooden floor. Upon looking up, she found her worry to be over nothing, Bear having been the culprit.
I'm so sorry, Ver.
She apologized frantically.
Let me clean that up for you.
Right as Ganyu attempted to grab a napkin to clean up her accidental spill, Bear stopped her by gently holding her wrist down.
Don't worry about it, Ganyu,
Ver assured calmly.
I've picked up far worse spills in my time here, so a few little drops of tea is just like any other day on the job.
Ganyu answered with a long and sorrowful sigh, her emotions in a state of chaos from the previous night.
You're right,
Ganyu stated guiltily.
I'm just so on edge after last night. It all just happened too fast and my anxiety is through the roof.
Take your time,
Ver advised.
You went from having a home and job to being homeless and lost in a matter of hours. It's natural for you to be so paranoid after something so traumatic.
Ganyu let out another long sigh, attempting to calm herself down. She was safe here and didn't need to fear anything, especially considering she was probably the healthiest of the 3 survivors of Liyue Harbor's downfall, meaning she needed to be strong for Keqing and Baiwen.
By the way, I had originally come to inform you of the Yu-Hung's condition. Not to accidentally scare you.
Ver confirmed, releasing Ganyu's wrist. Ganyu nodded in understanding, hoping that her attempt at stopping the bleeding had been enough to prolong her co-worker's fate.
How is she?
Ganyu asked with a pang of worry.
Right now, she's resting. But after managing to clean up the wound and your effort to stop the bleeding, I'd say she's well enough.
Bear assured.
However, she won't be able to walk due to her right leg being broken, so she'll have to stay here until we can get confirmation for an escort from Mondstadt. Did you fulfill my request? Yes, we sent out a messenger to the acting Grandmaster to alert her of your arrival today. And the details were kept vague for safety? Yes, Lady Ganyu. We specifically wrote that there had been a matter that required Mondstadt's help, and stated that the full details would be explained in full upon your meeting with the acting Grandmaster.
Ganyu nodded, having taken this measure to keep the destruction of Liyue Harbor secret from any prying enemies, shall the messenger be ambushed along the travel.
Has there been any news of the messenger arriving in Mondstadt?
Ganyu questioned.
Not yet, but I'd suggest you head to Mondstadt as soon as you can, seeing it's best you discuss last night's events with Mondstadt's officials as soon as possible. There's no telling if the acting Grand Master will agree to an escort for the Yu-Hung, and it's very important that news of Liyue Harbor's destruction and this new threat are heard and relayed to the other Archon capitals.
Ganyu nodded in agreement.
You're right, but I'd like to see the Yu-Hung before I leave. I just want to assure her that we are safe for the time being, as much as show her that I'm okay.
Ver smiled and nodded in return.
I feel like that's a good idea. However, if she's still asleep, please let her rest. In fact, if that's the case, I'll have you write her a note to assure her of things, and I'll give it to her as soon as she's awake. Very well, Ver. I promise not to disturb her shall she still be resting.
Ganyu finished, getting up from her seat and moving to the higher floors of the inn. She met Keqing's provided room upon a simple climb up the provided stairs just past the lobby. As quietly as she could manage, Ganyu turned the knob and opened the door just far enough to where she could see the state of her colleague. Upon eyeing the bed, she saw Keqing flat on her back with her eyes closed. Her shoulder laceration had been bandaged and wrapped to avoid infection, and she looked like she'd been sleepless for a week. Keeping her promise, Ganyu didn't disturb her, up until something made her stop.
I'm awake. You can come in.
Keqing had confirmed. Ganyu followed and made her way into the room, closing the door behind her gently. Keqing opened her puffy and bloodshot eyes, looking up at her fellow colleague with a blank expression. Ganyu? I swear, if it weren't for the horns, I wouldn't have even recognized you. Keqing commented, to which Ganyu had no retort. Considering we only associate during work hours, I can understand why you wouldn't. Ganyu agreed. Keqing attempted to sit up until Ganyu quickly stopped her. You need to rest, Ganyu commanded. You took a bad hit last night, and we're in the process of getting your injuries sorted out. Until then, you just need to let your body rest. I know, Keqing responded. I'm not trying to get out of bed. Just sit up more so I can talk better. Ganyu saw no harm in that, and allowed Keqing to continue her struggle. She didn't even attempt to help her, knowing just how stubborn Keqing was. Therefore, unless she asked for the assistant herself, would she even try. Keqing grunted in pain from her injury, but eventually she was able to settle herself up to where her back was flat against the headboard of the bed. I need to tell you exactly how everything went down last night, Keqing inquired. You need to know what we're up against, seeing I feel that what happened last night isn't the end. Ganyu could hear a sincerity in her voice, and she was right. If she was going to fight back against whatever killed Ningguang, she was going to need to know everything. I'm listening, Ganyu stated, allowing Keqing to continue. All right. I was monitoring the city as I usually do every night before retiring from my duties, and at first, everything was fine, up until something caught my attention. A band of oddly dressed people. I carefully watched them and found that they were entering places that were populated with large numbers of citizens one by one, and that struck me as irregular behavior. I had decided to investigate further, but right as I was about to enter one of the buildings, I heard a massive explosion in the distance. However, after the first one came another that was closer, followed by another and another. That was when I realized the explosions were eventually leading to my position, and before I could back away in time, the doors of the building I was set to enter blew off their hinges. Luckily, the majority of the force from the explosion was blocked by my sword, but I still ended up getting hit back pretty hard. My injuries were the least of my worries though, and I focused on moving fast to save any of the people who had been involved in the explosions. I searched every building and called out for them desperately, but no answers ever came. It was apparent that whatever damage these explosions had caused from the inside had been enough to kill anyone in its path. The only person I ever ended up finding was our once boss, and upon seeing me, she knew there was no survivors to speak of. She had ordered me to go after you, knowing we were the only two besides her that could seek out help if the worst-case scenario were to come to pass. Ningguang had planned to go after whoever had caused the mayhem, while I seek you out to help. I reluctantly agreed and set out towards your home, but along the way ran into one of the culprits of the bombings. He seemed like nothing I'd fought before, so I took him on, hoping to detain him and get information on his cohorts. However, upon the moment I attempted to land the first strike, I was quickly brought to realization that this threat wasn't just another casual enemy. He used some smaller bombs to stun me, and that's what led to my right arm nearly being severed. But I managed to block his attack with my sword and avoid the full damage of the blow. However, he still managed to deal me a great amount of damage, and knowing I couldn't win, manifested some mimics to distract him. I managed to retreat and hide long enough to avoid being killed, and by the time I came out of hiding, that's when I ran into you. If you hadn't found me a second sooner, I feel that the overwhelming heat and smoke would have done me in. Ganyu shivered at the explanation. If there was more than one of the things that she saw kill her boss in 2 blows, she wasn't sure if there was any chance of victory. She decided to test her theory. Did you notice anything particular about your enemy's methods? Ganyu asked. Like what? Keqing responded. Did he absorb your elemental energy from your attacks? No, he was just too quick for my eyes to follow. Had I not seen just the slightest glint of his blade, my arm would have been cut clean off. Ganyu let out a long breath of relief, but wasn't any less intimidated by their new enemy of a different breed and caliber. Why would you think he could absorb my energy? Keqing followed up. Because it's how our leader was murdered. Ganyu answered directly. Keqing's face went as pale as a ghost, unsure if what she had just heard had been real or a trick of her mind. Murdered? Surely you're not serious. Ganyu gave an expression of sorrow that made Keqing clearly see that she wasn't joking. He absorbed my energy from my arrows that I had attempted to kill or subdue him with, and used it to free and shatter Lady Ningguang to pieces. Ganyu confessed. He did so in 2 blows at speeds my own eyes couldn't track. It was like a strike of lightning, and he only let me go out of respect for giving him what he needed to finish the job. Keqing was silent for a long moment, absorbing all of the new and grim information at a slow pace. Her calm demeanor had changed to a more fearful one, as if she were a child scared of the dark. We need to figure out who attacked and destroyed our home, Ganyu inquired. You said these people were oddly dressed. Were there any specific details about them that could give a better idea to narrowing down whoever our enemy may be? Keqing nodded. They wore black cloaks with the symbol of an eye on the back of their hoods that was drawn in red ink, and the one I fought also wore a mask. What kind of mask? Ganyu pushed. A masquerade-style one that resembled the face of a raven. Keqing confirmed. Another thing to note as well is that their main weapon of choice is bombs of all kinds. Ganyu nodded. I'll be sure to relay all of this to the acting Grand Master of Mondstadt, and pray that the answer to who our foe is given without struggle. Keqing nodded in agreement, and Ganyu took that as her cue to start preparing for her journey to Mondstadt. She turned to leave, but before she began to turn the knob, Keqing spoke out one more time. Ganyu? Ganyu turned at the request. Yes? Thank you for saving my life. I'll never forget that. Ganyu nodded with a smile, then turned the knob with ease. She had no idea what was to come in the road ahead of her, but as one of the only things left of Liyue Harbor's existence, she knew she had to make sure her survival hadn't been for nothing. Upon closing the door, she started for her own room to prepare for her long trip to the Anemo Archon's capital beyond the mountains of Liyue. The trip to Mondstadt's gate had taken Ganyu only a couple hours, having to fight a few slimes and treasure hoarders that had taken her as a trespasser. It had only taken a couple of shots from her bow to conclude those encounters, and upon meeting the site of Dawn Winery, she decided to stop and nourish her body with some nearby flowers that she had picked along the way. Being part Adeptus, her taste buds delighted the flavor of the vegetation, carrying a bitterness that Qilin preferred in their usual diet. 3 had been enough to savor her slight hunger, so she had carried on along the main path that led to the outside of Mondstadt's borders, surprisingly not encountering any hilichurls along the way. Upon seeing the windmills of the Anemo capital, she had become relieved, not wishing to end more lives if she could avoid it. Crossing the bridge, she was met with a cautious greeting by the 2 guards standing opposite one another outside Mondstadt's entrance. "May I please have your name?" asked one of the guards, following his usual protocol with new visitors.
"My name is Ganyu."
Ganyu obliged.
"I am one of the main members of Liwei's government, the Keqing, and have come regarding business with Acting Grand Master Jing Gulinder."
The guard didn't question her further, having been informed of Ganyu's arrival by Jin not long before. "We've been expecting you, Ganyu of the Keqing. Please, proceed to the Knights of Favonia's headquarters. Our cavalry captain will escort you from there." Ganyu nodded.
"Thank you."
Once she had clearance, Ganyu proceeded through the gate, unsure of where to go from there. Ganyu had never been outside of Liyue in her entire life, so Mondstadt was a whole new territory for her. The scent of several types of foods met her immediately upon stepping up the first set of steps, the majority being repulsive to her. She knew the scents of meats of all varieties all too well, due to said product being a common serving at the once popular Wanmin restaurant in Liyue Harbor. It had been a place that had sold and served mainly meat-based dishes, mostly being prepared and seasoned with spicy variants. Being a vegetarian, she couldn't stand the sight or scent of any meat, so she preferred to just keep her distance. Doing her best to ignore the odor, she looked around for any sort of sign that could direct her to her next destination, but no such signs were present along the streets of the massive utopia. However, upon a glance to her left, there was one building she recognized well: the Adventurers Guild. Considering the occupant in the booth was very familiar with Mondstadt, surely they'd know the way to the headquarters. She walked up to the booth, to which the current member of said guild greeted her merrily with the slogan of the guild.
"Ad Astra Abyssask," spoke the lady. "Welcome to the Adventurers Guild. My name is Catherine. How may I assist you?"
Ganyu decided not to look at this greeting as abnormal out of respect and just proceeded with what she came here for.
"Greetings,"
Ganyu replied.
"I just simply need directions to the headquarters of the Knights of Favonius. I'm new here and have come here on strict business with your acting Grand Master."
Catherine nodded in complete understanding.
I can see this is an urgent matter, so I won't waste any time,"
Catherine assured, relieving Ganyu.
"The directions to that place are a little tedious to follow, so I'm going to lead you to a fellow member of the guild and actual knight of the Knights of Favonius. Her name is Amber, and she just returned from her duties for her lunch break, so she should be seated at Good Hunter just up the steps and to the left. However, sometimes she likes to have a quick drink with her friend at the local tavern Angel Share as well, so you may also find her there. The tavern is just down the steps left of the gate, and if you follow that direction, you should run right into it."
Ganyu wasn't sure about the idea of having a drink while still having to work after the fact, but she really couldn't judge, so she just took it with a grain of salt.
"Alright, but how do I identify them?"
Ganyu questioned.
"Oh, Amber's easy to spot. Just look for a girl in red with goggles atop her head. You can't miss her."
Ganyu just took it, hoping that spotting her was as easy as Catherine claimed it to be.
"Alright, thank you for the help."
Ganyu finished, waving goodbye to Catherine.
"You're very welcome. Ad Astra Abyssask,"
Catherine replied as Ganyu made her way up towards Good Hunter. The scent she hated grew stronger as she neared it, looking around the seated area for a girl in red. To her relief, no such girl was seated, so she made her way back down the steps and followed the left path as she was instructed to do. Sure enough, she eventually met the tavern, a lone man guarding the door. She walked up to him and greeted him in kind. "Hello, sir. I'm looking for someone named Amber," she informed. "Did she happen to enter the tavern?" You could see that Ganyu wasn't looking for any negative business with the person in question, so he didn't give her any sort of negative retort. "As a matter of fact, she did enter about 5 minutes ago," he replied. "May I ask exactly why you're looking for her?" Ganyu nodded as an assurance that she had nothing to hide. "I was referred to her by Catherine of the Adventurers Guild as a guide to the Knights of Avonia's headquarters," she replied. "I'm here on business with the acting Grand Master, so it's critical I get there as quickly as possible." The guard nodded in assurance. "Ah, very well. If I weren't posted here, I'd lead you myself, but duties are duties. Go on in, ma'am." "Thank you very much, sir." With that exchange concluded, Ganyu moved to the door and pushed it open. Upon the very first whiff of the inside of the building, Ganyu felt slightly nauseous. An overwhelming smell of strong alcohol purged her nostrils and didn't let go, making her feel as if she were slightly drunk from the scent alone. After adapting to the odor, she was able to finally focus on finding her target. Moving past the main lobby, she looked around the seating area of the tavern's lower floor, finding a girl dressed in red that stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the crowd of drunkards. Catherine hadn't been joking when she had said Amber would be easy to spot. She was seated with another lady that appeared elegant and of royal heritage, to which Ganyu guessed as the friend Catherine had mentioned. She worked her way through the seated drunks and alcoholics carefully, eventually reaching the table her target was seated at. "Excuse me," Ganyu greeted kindly. "I don't mean to interrupt your conversation, but I'm looking for Amber." The red-clad girl winced at the mention of her name, turning to Ganyu with a bright smile. "That's me," Amber greeted brightly. "What do you need from me?" "My name is Ganyu, and I'm here regarding strict business with your acting Grand Master," she inquired. "I was referred to you for directions to your headquarters." Amber nodded. "Greetings, Ganyu," Amber greeted kindly. "You already know my name, so I won't waste time. This is my friend and fellow knight of Avonius, Eula." "Salutations, fellow traveler," Eula greeted in an elegant manner. "Looks like my assumption was correct," Ganyu thought to herself. "Hello there." Ganyu greeted Eula, not wanting to be rude. However, upon Eula's response, Ganyu was immediately dumbfounded. "One did not bow in their greeting to one of the Lawrence clan? This simply cannot go unpunished. Mark my words, vengeance will be mine." Ganyu was speechless at the remark. It seemed unnecessary and over the top, but upon Amber's interference, it was made quite clear that this was just part of Eula's personality. "Don't mind her. Eula is like this with everyone, even her best friends." Ganyu was still unable to speak anything on the matter, so she just moved on. However, Amber beat her to the punch. "Jean did say something about a visitor coming to Mondstadt today, so I'm guessing that's you?" Ganyu nodded. "All right, I'll be more than happy to take you to the Knights of Avonia's headquarters, but first, I need to finish my drink. I won't be long, and don't worry, this beverage isn't powerful enough to get me drunk after just one serving. Eula's, on the other hand, that's a different story." "What? I like my alcohol strong and bitter. Eula commented. Thou questions my alcohol preferences? Yet another thing to add to my list of reasons to seek vengeance on you. Amber responded with a sheepish giggle. Just take a seat at the front counter, Amber advised. I shouldn't be any longer than 5 minutes. Ganyu accepted the request, allowing her guide privacy by walking up to the front counter and seating herself. Seconds after resting herself on the stool and crossing her legs, she was met with another greeting behind the counter. What'll it be? Looking up, she was met with the sight of a tall man dressed with mostly black clothing. His hair resembled fire, tied into a long ponytail, and his hands were dressed with black gloves. Oh, no thanks, she answered. I don't drink. The man's blank expression didn't shift or change at all. I know you don't, but you intrigued me enough to get my attention. He spoke. I know most of the faces that come in here, and yours is new. However, the fact that you're not from around here isn't what intrigues me. It's your engagement with the 2 Knights of Favonius you just greeted over there. Ganyu was intimidated, not sure whether to run or keep talking to this mysterious man. I was simply looking for someone I was referred to. That's all. Ganyu answered. The man didn't shift in any way, showing he wasn't impressed with her answer. Judging from your clothing, I believe you are from Liyue, he guessed. Not to mention that you are definitely more special than the average human being. Seeing your horns prove that you are half Adeptus. Someone like you doesn't just come to Mondstadt for a drink or sightseeing. You're here for important reasons, aren't you? Ganyu knew that she couldn't fool this man at all, and she had no idea what to say or do. Her business was private, and she had no idea who this man was to spill any information regarding her reasons for being in Mondstadt. Look, my business is my own, and I'd appreciate that you not pry into my business any further, she demanded. You misunderstand me, stranger, the man answered. I'm not looking to pry into your business, nor do I wish to force you to do anything you don't want to. All I'm wanting to do is help you figure out what answers you're seeking. However, if you want my assistance, you must keep our business out of the Knights of Favonius' ears. Ganyu's curiosity piqued at that. Weren't the Knights of Favonius her allies? Why do you want to keep this conversation secret so bad? She asked, actually curious why. Let's just say I don't trust them, he answered. I have many past interactions with the Knights that I'd rather not speak of, but let's just say they didn't end well. I keep my distance from them as much as anything they are unaware of out of their ears to avoid repeating past mistakes. They aren't evil or threatening to Mondstadt, just reckless in situations that actually need to be spoken of. They'd rather sweep their mistakes under the rug than actually face the consequences. His voice didn't give Ganyu any sort of alert that he was lying, and oddly reminded her of Ningguang's hasty recklessness in certain matters. It was practically like 2 peas in a pod. She decided to listen more. In what ways can you help me? She questioned. The man finally shifted in his demeanor, meaning he was finally intrigued. If you want answers, meet me behind the tavern at midnight tonight, he answered. Like I said, any word of this is to stay out of the Knight's ears. Otherwise, our business will be no more. Ganyu nodded in understanding. All right, I'll see you tonight, she confirmed. Upon her agreement with the bartender, an arm met her shoulder, turning to meet her practical tour guide. "Ready to go, Ganyu?" Amber asked.
Mm-hmm.
Ganyu answered simply, getting up from the stool and moving to the exit with Amber. Upon exiting, she looked back one more time at her new business partner, only to see that he had gone elsewhere. Jean jumped at the sound of her office door opening, entering Ganyu, Amber, and Kaya one at a time. The sight of Ganyu assured her that her expected guest from afar had finally arrived, to which she got up from her desk and moved towards her new company of 3. Jean had been expecting the cavalry captain upon her guest's arrival, but Amber hadn't been expected at all. She had originally planned to speak with Amber on the following situation after discussing the terms of how it would be resolved, but seeing she was already here, she decided to just wave away the original plans. "Ah, you must be the one who requested the Knights of Avonius' assistance in the letter sent from Wang Shuwen?" Jean greeted. "It is an honor to welcome you to Mondstadt and the Knights of Avonius headquarters. I am the current acting Grand Master, Jean." "It is an honor to make your acquaintance, Grandmaster Jean." Ganyu replied. "I am Ganyu of the Keqing." Jean nodded with a smile, proceeding to the business afoot. "May I ask why you have reached out to us? The letter didn't explain everything fully, so I'm hoping that you can fill in the blanks." "Of course." Ganyu started, recollecting everything Keqing had told her. "As of last night, Liyue Harbor was attacked and sunk into the ocean by the Fatui. However, this wasn't just any regular Fatui agents. They are able to absorb elemental energy that they are attacked with and use it temporarily as a weapon without the use of a vision." All of the company in the room expressed looks of horror. It was clear that they hadn't been expecting news of this caliber, and given the severity of the situation, Ganyu continued. "That's not all, though. The Tianshuan was also murdered using this tactic, and the Yuheng was severely injured by another agent of the specific group. Therefore, the Yuheng and I are all that remain of the Keqing, and we fear that, even though the leader had said it was solely an act of vengeance, that this isn't the last of the attacks. Not to mention that the former guardians of Liyue, the Adepti, made no show or interfered with the attacks, along with the fact that the former god of Liyue is also missing. The fact that even gods and divine creatures of much wisdom and tactical knowledge are missing, and this threat may have something to do with it, raises a whole new level of danger. We fear that the Fatui group we encountered are going to attack again. We just don't know where yet. That's why I'm here. As one of the remaining Keqing, I feel Teyvat is in danger, and we need to stop them before they strike again. I ask that you help us to find a way to stop this group of agents, as much as whatever is coming next." It was clear that Jean had been convinced, her arms folded and face expressing a look of extreme focus. A sight Ganyu was relieved to see in response to her requests for help. "First and foremost, you need not have any fear of me not believing you," Jean assured. "Mondstadt has had its fair share of dealings with the Fatui, but never of what you are describing. This is a whole other level of savagery, and I am truly sorry that this happened to you and the Yuheng. The fact that they would commit such genocide and potentially endanger gods does not spell out as what it was claimed to be by the leader. To me, it feels more like an attack meant to target the Geo capital itself, as much as the one who governed it. Therefore, Your assumption as that attack not being the last one doesn't seem far from impossible. And if the intended target is major capitals of Teyvat and their leaders, we definitely have a threat on our hands. Ganyu was relieved that she'd gotten the message across and had made her and Keqing's assumptions feasible. However, the question was what to do, and that wasn't easy to answer. After a moment of thought, Jean continued. If we plan to stand any chance against this group, we need to know as much as possible about their strengths, tactics, and appearance, so we can be prepared to fight back. You and the Yuheng were the prime witnesses to these savages firsthand, so I need you to tell me any specific details these Fatui agents had that attacked your city. Ganyu nodded, doing her best to remember what Keqing had specified. Ganyu may have had a close encounter with one of them, but the only thing she remembered specifically was what he did to Ningguang. Taking a breath, she started to explain everything. According to the Yuheng, she said that they had a symbol of an eye drawn out in red ink on the back of their hoods of their cloaks. Some of them also wore masks of the face of a raven, and their primary weapon was bombs of all sorts. It's how they initiated the attacks and how my colleague ended up with her near-fatal injury. Anything else? I'm afraid not. Jean nodded in understanding, absorbing all of the information she'd just been given. This was definitely not something she was prepared for, so it was natural for her to be taking her time to clarify the next step of action. Upon concluding her plotting, Jean spoke her verdict. All right, you have Mondstadt's support, Ganyu of the Keqing. Jean clarified, turning to Kaya. Kaya, please prepare an escort for the Yuheng residing at Wangshuwen. I'll be sure to inform the cathedral of her arrival, and I'll prepare a healing session for her. As you wish. Kaya agreed, turning and leaving to carry out his orders. As for our security, seeing there is a potential threat among us, I want the gates closed before sunset. Jean ordered, eyeing Amber. Double the guards posted atop the walls of the city and have a notice sent out regarding our temporary regulations as soon as possible. Yes, Master Jean. Amber accepted. Jean turned lastly to Ganyu, a smile grazing her lips. As for you, Ganyu of the Keqing, I need you to stay in Mondstadt for now. Jean clarified. I still have much to discuss with you regarding this whole situation, and I need you here for a while. Don't worry, we'll provide you with hospitality at no cost, you and your colleague both. I'll also have some new clothes arranged for you as well, seeing I'm sure you don't want to be wearing the same thing every single day. Oh, Grandmaster Jean, you don't have to go through all that trouble for my sake. Ganyu assured. It's no trouble at all, Miss Ganyu. Jean replied. There are plenty of spare clothes that the Knights of Favonius never wear, so it's not even a problem for our brigade. Our fellow nuns of the church will take care of washing your dirty laundry as well, so please don't worry about it. Leave the easy work to us. Ganyu reluctantly nodded in agreement, knowing she couldn't win. Very good. We will get those arrangements sorted out shortly. For now, you are welcome to help out Amber if you wish, seeing Kaya will have plenty of help in his duties. Mondstadt is a big city, so getting the word out will be an arduous task, and our fellow outrider could use all the help she can get. Sure. Ganyu accepted, turning to Amber. After all, I do owe her a favor in return for leading me here in the first place. You don't owe me anything, Amber replied. I just like to help people, especially if they need it for a good reason. As do I. Ganyu clarified, making it clear her mind was made up. Amber smiled, signaling Ganyu to join her. Come along then, Amber ordered nicely. We've got a lot of ground to cover,
So, it's best we start as soon as we possibly can.
Ganyu nodded, walking to Amber's position and turning to the door.
Good luck, you two.
Jean finished, returning to her desk to prepare for her own set of tasks, as Ganyu and Amber exited the room together.